Good evening, everyone. My name is Brooks Curtis, and as Chair of the Environmental Commission, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to the September 26, 2024 electronic meeting of the Environmental Commission. We'll conduct this meeting like an in-person meeting. So during roll call, please indicate your location. Public comment is welcome and will be via telephone only. To speak at public comment, call 888-788-0099. Enter meeting ID 962-0336-6543. This information is available on the published agenda in the public notices section on the city's website and broadcast of this meeting on CTN Channel 16, AT&T Channel 99, and online at a2gov.org/watchctn. Aaron, will you read the land heritage statement?
Yes. Share my screen as well. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from Indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thanks. Do you mind doing the roll call now?
Yes. Councilmember Ackman is absent today. Vice Chair Brown.
He was on for a second, then he dropped off. So
Okay. Well, let me just double check he's not sitting in the lobby. Okay. Chair Curtis.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Dale.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Councilmember Dish.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Graham.
I'm here, Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Gruber will be here a little later. Commissioner Marson.
I'm here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Mirsky.
Here in Seattle.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Nedrich. Oh. There you are. We can't hear you. She's here. Commissioner Peterswood.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Smith.
Here in Ann Arbor.
And Commissioner Wahing. Here comes Steve. Okay, absent. Okay, that is a quorum.
Okay, great. Does anybody want to make changes to the agenda? Looks like Steve Brown is back on.
Great.
Okay, is there a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Does anyone want to make changes to the minutes from last month's meeting?
I had a change.
Okay.
I was listed as present at that meeting, but I was not.
Oh, gosh. Maybe you were there in spirit.
Definitely in spirit, but not in person or online.
Apologies for that.
No problem.
I will fix that.
Any other changes?
I think I had the opposite problem last time.
Yeah.
I marked you absent when you were there.
Is there a motion for approval of the agenda or the meeting minutes? There's a first and a second.
So moved.
Okay. Next is public comment. This is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 888-788-0099. Enter meeting ID 962-0336-6543. To raise your hand, press 9. To unmute, press *6. City staff will select callers who have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. There may be a delay up to 30 seconds before connection is established. Aaron, do we have any callers?
No callers.
Okay.
Chair Curtis, we took motions on both the minutes and the minutes, but we never took a vote to approve them. So maybe we can do that to see in the interim while we're waiting for anybody else maybe to raise their hand.
Okay, sorry about that. Do we want to approve the agenda? First, second. Thanks, John. And do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So we have motions for both. We just didn't take votes.
Okay, so votes, all votes. For the agendas. Okay, now the minutes.
Approved.
All right, I don't think we have any old unfinished business, so now it's new business. And I think the first presentation up is from Sarah Nedrich.
All right, is my mic working now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. It's always my AirPods that screw things up. Don't know why I even try. All right, let's see if I can share. Aaron, you got me on backup?
See,
Telling me I don't have the security to share.
I just made you co-host. Did that anything change?
Let's see. Maybe Nope. No, I think it's in my security issue. It's like my Apple's not letting it. You mind just sharing?
Yeah.
Fine. Okay. Sweet. All right. Well, I guess while she's getting that up, I can kind of start. So the water quality work group was asked to pick a topic to present on or to have a speaker come talk about. There were like 4 different things I thought would be really useful. And I talked to our water quality work group and they thought sort of a regulatory overview. So a discussion of what agencies are involved in decisions regarding water in the city. And sort of a discussion of those legal frameworks would be really useful and very insightful and help not only the council members that are sitting on this commission, but also activists within the community that want to get things done around water. So the water quality work group kind of worked as a team to put this together. And I wanted to first make sure I say the disclaimer that I am not a lawyer. I'm just a professional person who works in water. So I'm trying to share knowledge. From the water quality work group, we had a lot of help from Kelly McCabe from the Huron River Watershed Council. Aaron helped work with us to put together slides on the city. Abigail Reed, a student from U of M in our work group. And Hank also helped by getting one of his professors to review our presentation, Professor Devin Judge Lord, who works particularly on environmental policy. So hopefully this will be a good overview for you all. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Aaron. All right. Oh, would it be possible? Well, that's okay.
Yeah. I can. I'll switch to the PowerPoint. I just pulled that one up too.
Okay. Sweet. Yeah, that because I have animation, so it'll make it less boring. Yeah. Okay, not that this is going to be boring, guys. This is going to be fun. So for our presentation outline, again, we're going to go over the governmental I can follow governmental agencies and their various regulations and regulatory authorities. And then we're going to also include some other authorities important to the city and their delegated entities. We're going to also go over some case studies, and that's really the fun part, where we get to look at all these different laws and how they apply to issues that the city is currently facing. So we're going to look at nutrient pollution, pesticides regulation, and PFAS in the Huron River. And so our governmental agency outline is broken up by federal, state, county, and city authorities. So we're going to start with federal and work our way down to the city.
Are you looking at the right slide?
Well, I think you're sharing
Or
yeah, it's fine by me, but I don't have any notes. There's nothing to see. But yeah, you can go to the next slide.
Okay, let me try one thing. See how do I fix that? Okay, how's that?
Oh, perfect. Yay. Okay. 5 minutes in, we got it. Okay. Okay, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay. So for our learning objectives, I hope that you all take away gaining familiarity with like at least one agency with responsibility for water. I think hopefully you guys will learn something new. Second, it's important to realize that multiple agencies on the state, federal, and local levels may be needed to achieve an optimal environmental outcome. So all these players work together on issues. And then third, participation by local activists and governments is essential to enhancing communication between those agencies and to align all their different priorities to come up with beneficial local outcomes. All right, next slide. So before we get into the various agencies, a basic understanding of the hydrologic cycles needed. Agencies split up the water cycle. So the bodies that are regulating groundwater are not the same bodies that are regulating surface water, like rivers, wetlands, and lakes. Also, the Great Lakes are regulated by even a different authority. Then atmospheric water is regulated by NOAA. So understanding that this water is partitioned and that agencies, maybe there's not always good communication between these different intersections, even though water is water. Next slide. So some other limitations agencies have is that not all regulations or statutes have teeth. And by teeth, we mean having sufficient regulatory authority to enforce their laws. So maybe in their statute, it says you are to regulate nutrient pollution, but then for someone discharging nutrients, there's no fine, right? So teeth can be in terms of a fine or can be in terms of, some penalty to a bad actor. If that doesn't exist, the regulatory authority doesn't really have much to go from. Another really important point is that not all agencies are sufficiently funded and staffed. When I worked at the remediation division for the state, I was managing all of Washtenaw County, which was like 1,000 different contaminated sites. And then when I worked for Water Resources Division at the state, I was monitoring 5 statewide programs. So any person that has that much workload can't be proactive. What happens is you end up being reactive. So that can be really hard for agencies to deal with. Okay, next slide. All right, so we're going to get into the different agencies. And I put alphabet soup, as you'll see. Government folks like to have lots of acronyms. But they're important to know, so I kind of left them in. Apologies, and if you get confused or forget what an acronym is, feel free to raise your hand and stop me. All right, Erin, you're gonna have to get click happy. All right, so, okay, wait, stop, the EPA. Okay, so for the EPA, they are the major regulatory authority for water at the federal level. So they regulate under the Clean Water Act. They have the Office of Drinking Water, or Office of Water, which has drinking water and infrastructure oversight, surface water monitoring, and impairment listings. So that means if a water body is really contaminated, it gets on their impaired list, and then that sends extra funding and resources to that impaired water body. They also have the Office of Land and Emergency Management, which does groundwater remediation, and programs under that are Superfund, which is relevant to Gelman, which was just listed as a Superfund site. Areas of concern, CERCLA, which is for industrial facilities that are no longer operating and might have contamination. And then RCRA, which is active industrial facilities that have known groundwater contamination. And then the Office of Pesticide Programs also does pesticide labeling and approvals, which has a downstream impact on water quality. All right, the next is USDA, which is the U.S. Department of Agricultural, Natural Resources Conservation Service. So these guys are maybe a little less known for what they do, but they're regulated under the Water Bank Act and Farms of the Future Act. So they have a few voluntary programs. So these are programs that farmers can sort of opt into, and they get subsidies if they're involved in them. So one is the Conservation Restoration Program, the Wetland Protection Program, and then they have a myriad of other soil and water conservation programs. And you see I have my little icons of the teeth. So it's really important to note here that EPA has a lot stronger regulatory authorities and the capability to do enforcement actions, whereas an agency like USDA NRCS is more of a voluntary program. So farmers opt into these programs and they're not really penalized if they're not compliant. Okay. And then the last on this sheet is the US Army Corps of Engineers. They come into play whenever you have any type of dredging or river-based work where you're really impacting the floodplain. So you won't probably interact with them as much, but. All right, 4 more federal agencies. Think 7's enough? Okay, so next we have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they really are the primary agency that deals with species in water. So the Migratory Bird Act, which has protections for waterfowl, and the Endangered Species Act, which protects threatened and endangered species, like our local endangered and threatened mussel species that live in our river. They also will evaluate new species to add to the threatened and endangered species list. So they're constantly reviewing that and adding species as they become more or less rare. We'll go to USGS. So USGS is the US Geological Survey. They're actually the oldest of the agencies, created with the Organic Act in 1879. And they were originally created to survey the land. So they were the first group that actually made maps for people. So they knew, where rivers were and where to put their cities and all those things. But still today, they do surveying of rivers, and they also do hydrological monitoring. So if you have your summer house up north and you're wondering if your dock's underwater, you're probably using a USGS stream gauge to check that out. And they are really good at research too. So a lot of the really cutting edge work on contaminants of emerging concern are done by USGS. All right, we'll move on to National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Like I said at the beginning, they deal with a lot of the atmospheric water. They do Great Lakes monitoring as well as hydrological monitoring to determine what Great Lakes water levels will look like for the year. And they have in Ann Arbor actually a research branch called GLERL, which is located just down on State Street. They have the Office of Response and Restoration, which helps follow up after oil spills. All right, and lastly, Coast Guard. Last but not least, they work on oil spill response. So that's all 7 federal agencies that have a foot in water. Now we'll go into the state agencies. So a lot of the state agencies actually get delegated authority from the EPA. Erin, if you just kind of want to go through these a little quickly. So we have Water Resources, which does surface water monitoring throughout the state. They also monitor our point source discharges. So that's like our wastewater treatment plant in the city. They'll help draft our permit for that. They also have non-point source funding and evaluation. So for instance, like runoff of phosphorus from farm fields, they would look at that. For the Office of Drinking Water, they are regulating under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Lead and Copper Rule. So they do inspections of all drinking water facilities, type 1 facilities in the state, which includes our drinking water plant in the city. They set maximum contaminant levels. So they're actually telling how much of a certain chemical can be in our drinking water. And they also do permitting. Remediation redevelopment, we actually had them here like a few months ago to present on some of the work that they're doing. So I feel like you guys maybe have a good understanding of that. But their regulatory authorities are Part 201 and 213, Superfund, and the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund. So they regulate groundwater contamination, hazardous materials, and do spill response as well as cleanups. Materials management is our landfill, is the landfill organization under Part 111 and Part 115. They also look at beneficial reuse of recycled materials. They evaluate whether you can stockpile soil here or there. They oversee hazardous waste disposal as well. And for the city's landfill, they do permitting for that. So that's the State Eagle Department. Then in the state, we have a few other agencies that touch water. So I'll start with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. They're regulated under the Public Health Code. The main way that the city probably interacts with them is they have fish advisories. So as you know, in the Huron River, we now have a fish advisory, do not eat because of PFAS. So that's the agency that did that evaluation and determined that was the case. They also have a water assistance program for low-income people or residents who can't afford their water bill. The Department of Ag and Rural Development is probably the closest agency to having any type of regulatory authority over pesticides. They do pesticide applicator training that's required by the state. They have the ability to monitor pesticide use. So they have a 2-year window where they can backlaw and ask for that data from farmers. They do special use authorizations for really nasty pesticides that are used for really special issues or problems that farmers are having. And then they develop guidance for new agricultural ventures. Right now, I know they're working really hard to come up with guidance for how to do marijuana growing, which creates a lot of water waste products. Okay, and then the last state one I have here is the Department of Natural Resources. They do fish and game licenses. So if you want to fish or hunt, you have to get a license through them. They do a lot of stream and wetland restoration for the state. They manage our state parks. And in addition to the federally listed threatened and endangered species, we also have state listed species. So if there's a species that the state feels really particularly strongly about protecting and the feds aren't going to list it, we can also list it within our state to get extra protections for that organism. And then they also do some aquatic monitoring, particularly for fish. So they're monitoring where game fish are increasing or decreasing, and they also do stocking of fish, certain game species. All right, so we can move to the next one, which is the county. So we're getting close to the city, guys. All right, so the health department is a major agency within the county that regulates groundwater. So they can issue groundwater use permits outside of the city. Within the city, we have like a prohibition zone for drilling new wells, but outside the city, they do work on that. They also do private well sampling. There are relatively few private wells within the city limits, but they are the ones that go out and would do that sampling. Next on here, we have the Water Commissioner's Office. They do a lot of work. I was actually surprised when I looked at their website to see how much they do. They are the permit holder for our MS4 permits. So that MS4 is just the sort of stormwater runoff limits for like how much stormwater you can put into our system, and sort of what levels of contaminants or runoff contaminants can be in there. They also oversee the Natural Area Preservation Group. They do permits for soil erosion and drain use. So that's, if there's a construction project going on, they will review that permit and make sure that that's being done so that there's not erosion into the drains. They have a stormwater grant, so to help improve stormwater issues in different places, and they have a rain garden program as well. Brooks, do you have a question?
Just a quick comment on the natural area preservation. The county, it's NAPP with 2 Ps.
Oh.
It's pronounced the same as the city one, but they have a different acronym.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that.
And the health
Yeah.
department regulates septic systems, which is a big deal for them.
Okay. Anya?
Not to detract too much, but I'm curious what the difference is between the MS4 permit versus like NPDES. Like what do each
Yeah. So
regulate?
NPDES is for point sources. So that would be like where you have water literally coming out of a pipe into a waterway. With MS4, it's more stormwater. So you think of like ownership of a whole plot of land. It's all that water when it rains that might run off. And it's not necessarily a point discharge, it's more diffuse.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, Erin, I think you're up.
Okay. Sorry, this is very text heavy, and I should have probably done cooler stuff with graphics. So I wanted to just provide a quick snapshot of a few compliance programs that the city follows. I just wanted to underscore that this is just scratching the surface of what our different departments are responsible for as far as meeting compliance with regulatory programs. So Ann Arbor Water, of course, is drinking water, water reclamation, and stormwater. So the water treatment plant, the Safe Drinking Water Act, of course, is a huge regulatory driver there. So that covers things like water quality standards, making sure that folks are drinking safe water, monitoring and reporting. If you guys don't read the yearly consumer reports for Ann Arbor Water, I would recommend it. There's lots of good info in there. They also do source water assessment and protection. So the water treatment plant has a wellhead protection program and a source water intake protection plan, and they do sampling in Barton Pond to monitor that source water, which all of you know, the majority of which comes from the Huron River. They also operate and run a laboratory there, so there's a lot that goes into that certification and being able to run their own samples there. They also have a point source discharge permit for a sludge pond there. And actually, when I heard Sarah talking, mention the Army Corps of Engineers, we also have, a whole, the water treatment plant operates and maintains 4 dams located on the Huron River, which kind of is its own thing. So, Barton, Argo, Geddes, and Superior, 2 of which are hydro dams. So there's a ton of regulatory issues that come in with that as well. Water reclamation, the NIPD's permit is a huge regulatory driver there. So the water, effluent water quality, so that's the water that's treated and then returned to the Huron River. That's what is has regulatory authority over that, and then operation, monitoring, and reporting. Then it also oversees the residuals management, so that includes biosolids there. And then systems planning houses our stormwater group. The city also has our own MS4 permit. I know there's both county drain and city drain within the city, which is confusing. So the city maintains their own MS4 permit as well. So they're doing things like TMDL, total maximum daily load implementation for impairments on the Huron, best management practices for stormwater. Yeah, the MS4 is a pretty complex permit with 6 different program areas. So the stormwater folks are managing all of those. And there's a big education component with that too. And then the floodplain management is meeting compliance with the FEMA flood insurance program, and I'll talk more about that in a second. And then Public Works is on here because they are responsible for the distribution and conveyance of all those other systems. So they're like the infrastructure and the pipes for all of those different water systems. We do have our stormwater is separate. So some cities have combined stormwater and wastewater, so ours are separate. So there's 3 separate systems. So there's a lot of asset management that goes along with that. They get involved when there's things like a sanitary sewer overflow and preventing that. They do a lot of cross-contaminate or cross-connection work between, because you don't want to mix your wastewater with your storm and et cetera. And they're also doing a lot right now with under the lead and copper rule. So they're replacing all galvanized water service lines in the city right now that were once connected to lead components. The lead components are all gone now, but they're doing a huge inventory and replacement of all those galvanized lines. And there's a really cool dashboard that you can find online to see kind of where they are with that process if folks are interested. And then we have a landfill that the solid waste kind of falls under Public Works. So landfill management kind of falls under Public Works as well. So that last slide was kind of like the city is part of the regulated community, but this slide I kind of wanted to highlight that we also serve as the regulator in some cases. So I included a couple examples of regulatory programs that help us meet our larger compliance program. So for example, the wastewater treatment plant has an industrial pretreatment program where industrial users send their discharge to the water reclamation for treatment. So those will have permit limits, and they sometimes require pretreatment. So the landfill purge water gets sent to the wastewater treatment plant, and they have an IPP, industrial pretreatment program permit for that. Stormwater erosion and sediment control permits. If anyone's going to be doing any soil disturbance, that permits to make sure that none of that leaves the site, and that's something that we inspect and enforce on. And then we do site plans for new developments to ensure, appropriate stormwater controls, among other things. And then we also have a bunch of just voluntary water resources protection programs that aren't mandatory, but we're doing because they help us meet our objectives, city objectives. And of course, everyone's very familiar with our stormwater infiltration guidelines, formerly the Green Streets guidelines of policy. We also do what's called the community rating system is another really good example. So that's kind of in our floodplain management. And so that program, the city participates in to help reduce flood risk and decrease flood insurance premium rates. So lots of work on the compliance side, and then lots of work on the kind of regulator and then voluntary program side. And then I'll hand it back over to Sarah.
Thank you. All right, so we just wanted to wrap up with some other authorities and advocates for water within our city. So we have some universities that really are quite good at doing research and advocacy work. We have Seigler, which, boy, don't ask me what that stands for. Great Lakes Research, something like that. Michigan Sea Grant Institute of Water Research. So those are all sort of housed here and include other universities as well within Michigan. Also, U of M has its own environmental health and safety program. So handling of hazardous materials on site are all regulated like within their purview. We have also a number of environmental, non-governmental, and nonprofit orgs, like the Huron River Watershed Council, which you're all likely familiar with. We also have the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. And we have regional and national groups as well, the Alliance for the Great Lakes, Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited. So all these groups kind of are available to help brainstorm and address issues relating to water in the city. All right, and then I think we can move into our case studies. So I wanted to kind of go through some specific
Sarah, before
issues
you go into
that we
that,
had.
Rita has her hand up.
Yes.
Her hand up.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Rita. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is just a quick comment, just in terms of the MS4 programs. Just I wanted to mention that there is a MS4 permit held by the county that addresses the Allen Creek drain that flows through West Park specifically. So it's differentiated from the city's MS4 permit. And we have a status of notice of violation for infiltration in that drain that I'm hoping is being followed up on. That's it. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. So I'll kind of go into our case study here. So I kind of wanted to outline how PFAS came to be regulated, because Michigan really was one of the first states to start regulating it. It was even prior to EPA starting to look at the issue. So really what keyed our government into doing this was that some advocacy groups convinced the Drinking Water Division in the state to pass MCLs. MCLs are maximum contaminant limits. So I actually passed the quantity of PFAS that is known to be toxic in drinking water. And because it became an MCL, then they had to go and monitor in all of the drinking water facilities. And then around that time when they started sampling, they did see PFAS detections in the city's water, Ann Arbor water facility. Next, we had Underwater Resources Division, Rule 57 values were developed. And what that allowed to happen was then if we had detections in surface water, that gave the Water Resources Division the regulatory authority to go after point discharges of PFAS. So when PFAS was first detected in the city's drinking water, they sampled in the Huron River and found it there. Then they linked that to Tribar as a point source. So if you want to go to the next bullet, yeah. So what really sped it along was the formation of a group called MPART. So like I illustrated earlier, within EGLE, there's 4 different branches of government: remediation, water resources, drinking water, and landfills, right? So those 4, in order to communicate on PFAS, what they did was form this MPART group, and it had points of contact from each division working collaboratively together. So that sped up the process for getting PFAS taken care of within the state. They were able to identify the source in Tribar. They were able to take a compliance action against Tribar to get them to turn off the spigot of PFAS into the Huron. Water Resources conducted fish sampling and found really high levels of PFOS in fish living in the Huron River, and then worked with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to set a fish advisory limit in the do not eat order. So the question is future action. Where can we go with the agencies to get our PFAS issue taken care of in the Huron? Because we'd like to eat the fish again someday, wouldn't we? So some ideas. There is potential through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to go through a natural resource damage assessment. So that's when there's been an impact to natural resources. In this case, it's our fishery. And it's also the work the city had to do to get us on carbon filters for our drinking water. There's this huge cost to the city. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually has a statute where you can get damages back for that effect to natural resources. So that's one future action that could be taken. But yeah, it's something maybe we can brainstorm about. We can go to the next case study now. All right, so we also wanted to talk about nutrient pollution in the Fort and Belleville lakes. So historically, there had been harmful algal blooms. So you can see that top right picture. The threat of harmful algal blooms is when it can create a cytotoxin that can be toxic to wildlife as well as dogs swimming in the lake. It also creates very large dead zones when all that plant matter dies. It decreases the oxygen loading and crashes the fishery. So in 1994, both Fort and Belleville lakes were listed as impaired for phosphorus. So that would have been Eagle Water Resources Division that did that. In 2004, Eagle set a limit for phosphorus of 0.05 milligrams phosphorus per liter. And the city kind of worked with a lot of their upgradient MS4 partners, as well as NPDES partners. Anyone responsible for phosphorus getting into the river joined this Middle Huron Partners group to work collaboratively to reduce phosphorus to the river. So they developed an implementation plan, which I think most recently was put out in 2023. In 2007, the city of Ann Arbor developed a phosphorus ordinance and lawn fertilizers. If you want to go to the next one. And in 2012, the Michigan fertilizer law was passed. So that sort of helped prevent fertilizer from being used directly adjacent to water bodies. And then in 2019, Eagle updated their TMDL, so they lowered it from 0.05 milligrams to 0.03. All right, and then lastly, yeah, if you want to see the current implementation plan for phosphorus in our watershed, that's the link for it. Yeah. All right, so at present, we're continuing to reduce phosphorus outputs to the river and to monitor. So that's nutrients.
Can I add something? I don't know where.
Yeah, yes, please do.
I just wanted to add that so recently the city signed an MOU, memorandum of understanding, with Ypsilanti Township to do to share data in Ford Lake. And we added some additional water quality sensors in Ford Lake to kind of understand the issue a little bit better. So looking at maybe alternative ways to reduce phosphorus in the lake other than, upstream sources. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. So I wanted to include a slide on pesticide regulations for my my pollinators working group ladies and fellows. So I wanted to look specifically at neonicotinoid pesticides. Those are the pesticides that are known to be associated with the bee colony collapse disorder, which has caused bee populations to crash in certain parts of the states. So in 1994, neonics were originally registered. Registration is conducted by EPA Office of Pesticide Programs. And they also do the labeling for pesticides. So when you go to the store and buy them, you see the label on there. That's the EPA that approves and reviews that. So Aaron, if you want to go next. Okay. So following that, within, I don't know, I have to do my mental math, 10 years of it, 12 years of it being out on the market, we started to see the first publications on colony collapse disorder. So this is when these, their behavior would change and they wouldn't be able to get back to the colony to make honey. Around this, and then, within about 10 years of that, the USGS, US Geological Survey, started doing surface water monitoring for neonics. And then very recently, Eagle's Water Resources Division started to set water limits, so surface water limits for neonicotinoids. Just recently, the EPA did their 15-year review for neonicotinoid pesticides. And it was still allowed to be used, but they did reduce the limits a little bit. Within the state, as far as what we're seeing of neonicotinoids, there are certain areas where they're starting to monitor surface water and finding it exceeding, chronic levels for effects to aquatic organisms. So it might be having an impact within the state on aquatic life. However, because it's a non-point source pollutant associated with agriculture, there's very limited authority on what we can do, assuming farmers are applying it according to label. So for the Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development, again, they have really limited authority. They can request records to see where it's being applied, but that's set at a 2-year time window. So they couldn't go back, say, 10 years to figure out who's applying it every year for the past 10 years. Natural Resource Conservation Service can help to promote conservation practices and integrated pest management. But again, they don't really have much enforcement capacity. Within our county, we have the Washtenaw County Conservation District that can provide conservation education. And currently, I think kind of what's been done on this issue is surface water monitoring throughout the state, which will lead to impairment listings for water bodies with really high concentrations of these pesticides. So yeah, that's the story on that. So I hope in our presentation today, you gained some familiarity with some agencies that you maybe didn't know existed before. I hope that we took away from this that the multiple agencies all kind of work together to achieve environmental outcomes, and that our participation as local activists and within our government is essential to helping those different agencies align their priorities toward good outcomes for the city. Oh, and so when we met with Professor Judge Lord, he had this really great recommendation of putting together a who to contact and their contact info within all these agencies, but I ran out of time. So that should be coming as part of our work group. And that's all. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
So I'll ask a question. The city has a few lakes, a couple at Dolph Nature Area and one at Olson. Is anybody responsible for water quality monitoring in the lakes?
That's a really good question. I don't think there is an appointed authority within the city. I know I personally have monitored First and Second Sister Lakes as part of a state level program that's voluntary. We got a grant from Washtenaw County. Their Clean Streams program had a $1,000 grant that I applied for and got money to monitor the lakes. But yeah, we just have like First and Second Sister Lakes are only natural lakes in Ann Arbor, and other lakes are impoundments are created. It would be good to have a program to monitor those regularly. They also have a huge ability to store phosphorus, so that's important for our TMDL, but excellent question.
Rita?
Thanks. Nice presentation. Thanks, Sarah. I just have a couple of comments on neonics. they are systemic pesticides, and very often the application is on agricultural seeds. And when those are planted, there is dust, neonicotinoid dust that's spreads around, and also runoff from fields. And that might be part of what's being picked up. I am so glad to hear about the water monitoring. I hadn't known about that. But what is a real concern is that the seed coating that is used is the neonics are potent and can actually kill birds. So when birds are attracted to those seeds, that's another issue. It's not just the insects, but of course, when the insects disappear, the birds don't have any food. The combination of things that happen when we apply pesticides is just amazing. And so, better would be to not use it. But it's a big regulatory issue, and I know it has to do with agriculture. And if only we could start moving away from that, that would be my wish.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the really tough things about the coatings too is like a lot of studies have shown they're not even effective at preventing pests. So it's like they're just doing it for funsies, putting it on there.
Right. Except the pesticide actually becomes part of the cells of the plant. And so then when the insects eat the plant, that's when they get affected by the pesticide itself. It's really it's just an awful thing. And yeah, prohibition would be my preference.
Erin, did you have your hand up? Oh no, you put it down. Okay.
I was just going to offer another comment on the water quality sampling. We contract with the Watershed Council to do a lot of our kind of TMDL implementation water quality sampling. So I can't speak specifically if we're looking at those areas, but it'd be worth checking out their water quality site. They have a nice graphic to show all their different sampling locations. And then I also was going to offer the state might do some sampling there as well to check for when they're doing their sampling for stream impairments or fresh or water body impairments.
Yeah, that's a good point. John?
Thank you. Thanks for really an informative presentation. That's quite a matrix of regulatory agencies, and we didn't even see all the regulations, but it's mind-boggling. I've got a number of questions. I don't know if I should throw them all out there and then you can decide what to or reply to. Maybe that's what I'll do. Some of these may or may not be appropriate for today's discussion. The first is within, I guess, the last year or so, the Supreme Court of the United States has handed down a couple of decisions that seem to me are potentially very, very consequential. The first is Stockett versus EPA that basically said that there has to be, as I understand it, running water in order for the Clean Water Act to apply, meaning marshes and bogs, fens, etc., are no longer covered. And then you had the reversal of the Chevron doctrine. And I'm wondering what is likely to be changed or challenged as a result of that. And, do we see any timeframes for when that's going to come? And what might be the implications for Ann Arbor? The other question that I have is, we talked about endangered species and threatened species, but I'm wondering who has regulatory control, if any, over invasive species and the monitoring and control of them. And then this is probably a topic for a different day, but what is the regulatory hierarchy for all this? Who is following whose regulations, and in what cases does, say, the city or the county or the state have the ability to overrule let's say, a federal regulation or set a higher standard, and when is it restricted? And I can imagine that varies a lot from one area to another. So those are sort of the top level things. And then I guess maybe at some time for a future meeting is, it'd be really interesting for us to hear from the water group, what should we in Ann Arbor be worried about? And what should we be proactively or maybe reactively addressing that we haven't been addressing up until now? So I'll just put all those out there, and either tonight or at some future time, I'd be interested in hearing responses to those. Thanks very much.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that was a lot. I mean, your legal questions are kind of outside my scope of knowledge. I have to say, when the Chevron deference decision was made, I was a little terrified at first. But then I think after talking to some folks, I realized it will impact existing court cases if they get relitigated. So it's not one of those things where all of a sudden this state will lose its rulemaking authority. It's more likely to get challenged if they come up with a rule that people don't like. But I'm not a lawyer. Being said, for invasive species, I know the Department of Natural Resources does a lot of work, as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the federal level. The state of Michigan's Water Resources Division does a lot for aquatic invasives. They're monitoring that pretty closely. So maybe that answers that question partially. And I think what you said about, coming back and giving an overview of what we should be worried about as a city from a water quality perspective, that's a great idea. Yes, let's follow up on that. Okay. Steve, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'm sorry I wasn't able to help with this presentation. It was a great presentation, and it'll be a great reference document for me, going forward to try to see where you could start. And I was just wondering, I mean, how does the city staff navigate, through this like maze of agencies? I really have no idea. But it seems like there's a large delay. You can see how it takes decades to actually try to resolve any kind of emerging problem. So I'm wondering what the city can do to at least release its delay in responding to incidents, because I'm sure a lot of it's money. But I just want to remind people that I know nobody here could probably answer that question, but I know I've heard from several sources statewide, through my work with several environmental groups that and actually this came up in a conversation with Brian Steglitz that Aaron was present for earlier this year, that actually a major problem is that the Clean Water Act is not enforced adequately to prevent taxpayers like the city of Ann Arbor paying through the Safe Drinking Water Act to clean up its polluted intake water for drinking water. So there needs to be much more enforcement at the federal level and at the state level, because my understanding is that the state is responsible for some enforcement through the Clean Water Act, just like they're responsible for issuing NPDES permits. And I just want to remind people that there used to be a law in Michigan that made polluters more accountable. But that law was neutered in 1994 by Governor Engler. And so there is a bill that's been drafted that was submitted to the state legislature this year to regain or to grant EGLO the authority that they used to have to try to regulate emissions, contamination, pollutions under the Clean Water Act. And it's called the Polluter Accountability Act. And there's still no political will in the state legislature to get this passed this year. It may have to happen in lame duck, is the only way it's going to happen. So I just want people to be aware of that and be reminded of this, and to contact, their state representatives and see and express whatever urgency they may feel about, getting more enforcement about actually contaminating the source waters for all of our drinking water. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to make that statement.
Thanks, Steve. Chris?
I was a great fan of and friend of Lana Pollock, who was behind the original Polluter Pay Act in the late 80s, I think, and
Mhm.
I fully support it. But the way that was implemented back then just made companies who had to deal with it furious. And it's not because they didn't want to do the cleanup, it's that the process of cleaning up is a learning exercise and a constantly shifting uh, problem to solve in terms of its costs. And the companies were going absolutely nuts. They wanted a set agreement. Let's do X and we can budget for it. And 6 months later, the game would change. So it's a very difficult thing to actually implement. And so just so you know the other side of the coin and why under Engler it disappeared so fast when you had the majority in both houses and all the industrial folks saying rah, 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 barking, barking. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for that remark, Chris. Yeah, Lana Pollock was behind this, but originally, but one of the major I think the fundamental problem is just that we have, industry is allowed to release metric tons of anything and
Yep.
just without proper testing, and to
Yep.
call it, generally regarded as safe when there's absolutely no data to back that up. And the federal government needs to focus more on what the Europeans are starting to do, where they call it the precautionary principle,
Yep.
where you're only given a permit to produce something and release it into the environment once you've proven that it's safe. Just like the drug industries, the drug industry is regulated like this, and these costs are not very high. They're in $10 million or less, as opposed to what it costs to clean everything up after it's already happened. So,
Maybe both these things can happen at the same time legislatively, because I completely agree with you. We got to put the proof on the other side of the coin here as far as what we're doing.
yeah.
And it applies to so many categories. How many plastic compounds are there now? 10,000 or something? Isn't that, I mean, you were
Well,
saying,
there's 14,000 PFAS compounds.
Yeah. PFAS alone.
And we only got,
Then things, it's not just one, okay, how does that perform? What happens when you put a bunch of them together?
yeah,
It's really
that's
good
right.
stuff.
Yeah, and only this year did the EPA declare the legacy ones, PFOS and PFOA, as hazardous substances. So it's taken 75 years after these compounds were released. Tons of them were released into the environment. It's taken 75 years for them to be declared hazardous substances.
And that's only 2 of the 14,000.
Oh, that's only true of 2 of the 14,000.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, thanks, Sarah. It was very interesting. I won't remember all the terms, but that's good. We'll look it up later.
Like I said, you just had to learn one thing, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next is, I think, Anya, are you doing the resolution first reading? Sarah, you're going to step out for this?
I don't know if we need to just actually present it and have people read through it or look at it, or just sort of give a background of why we're interested in bringing this resolution forward? Okay. And I don't think I have, do I have, oh, Steve, go ahead.
Oh, traditionally, we have at least posted it so people can read it that are watching on, CTN. I mean, a better thing is to read it out, but I'm not sure if we have the time for that.
Probably do, but I would start with why are we doing this, and then we can see how it goes.
So I'll start with the why. Reading the whole thing sounds daunting, but I'm happy to do it. But I'll start with the why. So we wanted to put forward this resolution in support of Senate Bill 228. So that bill has been introduced by Senator Schenck and Irwin and others. And the idea is really to repeal the law from 2016, PA 389, which that was the ban on bans, right? So the law that was set essentially to stop Washtenaw County and other Michigan communities from enacting local legislation that could reduce single-use plastics like plastic bags and takeout containers. So the general sentiment is that PA 389 is very broad and very restrictive, and essentially it sort of undercuts any local communities' actions that they might be able to take to try to curb the issues of single-use plastics. And so there's the Senate bill to revoke that. And there's been a few different communities, including Detroit, that have been passing resolutions in support of the Senate Bill 228. So there's other folks in Michigan are doing it. There's also a lot of examples of other states who have done things like having votes and having legal action so that they can require, for example, a small fee if somebody wanted a plastic bag, or otherwise have sort of disallowed plastic bags or required that some businesses, if they do have plastic bags, also have to offer alternative options like reusable bags or something like that. So there's over, I guess that's the biggest part. So the idea for this resolution is to offer support to the Senate Bill 228 and just trying to help that get through. Is there any questions that we need to do, or should we just really go through and read it out? Steve, do you want to say something? No? Rita?
Can you just give us an idea of where it is in the legislative process? Do you expect it to be addressed by the Senate and House this legislative year?
John, do you know more about that?
I don't know, sorry.
I do not know that offhand, where it is right now.
If anybody else does, they could go ahead and speak up. Apparently not. I just had a brief comment. Typically with resolutions like this, we have a first and a second reading. So we may not need to read through every word here. This has now been posted to Legislar. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to look at it, and we could talk about any concerns or proposed modifications, which we could then address between now and the next meeting, and then hopefully take this up. And if it passes, hand it off to City Council if they're so inclined to deal with the issue. That's all I wanted to say.
Bridget, do you have something?
I don't know if we're doing this yet, but I just have a comment about one of the whereas statements. This is great, by the way. Thank you for those of you that put this together. I think I'm excited to push this through. My only comment is the whereas statement that says, can I do that now? Is now a good time to be specific? Yeah, okay. That says, oh, where did it go? I'm looking at the screen, but maybe I'll pull it up on mine. Okay, if you could stop there. Whereas while allowing local governments to restrict plastic bags and single-use containers, all the way to simple and common sense solutions such as requiring stores to provide reusable bags for sale or providing containers made of more sustainable material for SMB. Recently, I've been hearing about California's ban that now they're seeing it didn't work like they had hoped because there was a loophole that these bags could be called reusable, and they didn't define that well. And so plastic companies made thick plastic bags and they were called reusable. And they did have a fee. I think people had to pay a small fee, but now they're seeing that the plastic pollution has something like doubled because essentially they're using twice as much plastic to make the bags and they're not really being reused. So I think my only statement here is maybe that example should just be taken out, or we could think a little bit more about it, but I don't know that that is simple and common sense. I think it's more complex now that we're seeing what's happening in California, and they're having to rewrite that law and think more about that loophole.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I also, so the basis for this resolution was taking language from what Detroit passed. And I had sort of second thoughts about that section as well for that. And then also the beginning of the whole while the allowing local governments, blah, 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 would create more of a burden on businesses and consumers. Like, I don't know that that's necessarily always true, you know? So, so that part was giving me pause too. So I personally am fine removing that whole whereas. Lisa, do you have something? I mean, is this something, so this is where I'm still sort of learning all the processes. If this is a first reading, I can go into the draft document and make that note for us to have, you know, comments on separately. And then that can be something, would that just be resolved between meetings through like comments in the draft? Lisa, did you have, you're the next one that I see with the hand up.
Yeah, I did, but I wasn't sure if you were done. So this is great. I'm really, really glad to see this. I think this is definitely something that we've had on our lobbying agenda for a while, the city council has. And so just in terms of the process that you went through to put this together, have you consulted with any staff members?
Yes, I shared it. I did share it with Sarah Mason and Jenny Petoskey, just asking for their they made some small changes, but not anything substantial to the content. So they've looked at it and said that they are generally supportive of it.
Okay. Typically we would also want to have it reviewed by the city attorney's office. And that's something that Erica and I could do after this body approves it, if you want to. That it probably, I don't know, I guess it probably makes more sense for us to run it by the city attorneys. And then I would definitely check in with, I'm really glad you talked to Ms. Mason and Ms. Petoskey, and I can check in with them as well, but that's a really good stop. There's just, sometimes you don't know if there's legal stuff. And there is a lot of language in this, like biodegradable, you know, there's a lot of language in this that I am not, you know, that I think we would need our lawyers to make sure that we weren't, like you say, sort of opening doors for something worse. But, and also sometimes we take the language from the Senate bill. So Detroit might have done that, but have you compared your language here with the Senate bill's language?
I've read the Senate bill, but I haven't sort of gone side by side to really do a thorough comparison of that. So I definitely could. I could spend some time on that this weekend, actually.
Thank you for doing this work.
I think I'm next. I'm in full support of this resolution. I was just a little bit surprised that there was no language in here about just the principle of allowing local control by city governments to be able to solve problems in their own jurisdiction without having whatever the forces were at the state level dictating down. So I don't have any proposed language or anything like that, but and I'm not necessarily requesting that anything be changed here, but I just wanted to point out that for me personally, in addition to all the environmental reasons here, I think the power of Ann Arbor and ground, from solving things from the ground up to solve big environmental problems like this is important. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. And thanks, Erin, for capturing all these comments in the document for us to get back to. Rita, do you have a comment now?
Just, I think you really addressed it in your thought to look at the state bill as well, because I think we do want to have something that's congruent with that. And the issue that Commissioner Gruber raised about kind of avoiding potential unintended consequences. If we can learn from what happened in California, that's a good thing. But great to move forward on this. I would love to see it.
Thank you. John?
Yes, thanks. I just have a very brief comment to Councilmember Dish's question about legal review. It's my experience that we haven't taken resolutions like this to legal until such time that the resolution passes the commission. Otherwise, we're sending a whole lot of different possible resolutions to legal and expending resources on something that may not even make it out of commission. So my suggestion would be, unless we hear otherwise, maybe from our two council liaisons, that in this case, we address some of the questions that come up already this evening and possibly in the future, and include that in the resolution, and only at that point provide it to council, and then they can provide it then to legal if they think there's even a chance that council would even take this up. Otherwise, like I said, we're just using resources at various levels that may not be justified in being expended. Thanks.
Great. Well, I think the comments, I think everybody's comments are really good ones, and ones I think are fairly easy for us to address by going back and looking through that. So if that's something that we will do in the document between meetings, I can take a first run at it in the next couple of days, and we can just go from there. Cool. Thank you.
I also think there might be a legal review kind of built into the approval process, but I can double check that too.
Council. Call the question.
Are there other questions or comments on this?
I need to send you a Robert's Rules of Order. When someone calls the question, you got to take a vote.
Yeah, do we need a resolution to table this for further review? Or sorry, a motion to table?
That would probably supersede, but you still need a vote to even do that.
Hey, do we need to have a motion to have a vote, Chris?
I think she made a motion to table. You need a second, and then you need to vote whether to table or not.
I'll
Okay,
second.
okay, Steve seconded, and then we have a vote.
Yep.
Have a show of hands for the vote.
Those voting in favor are
Oh,
the
we'll
table.
have a second reading next
Aye.
week or next month.
So
That's really great. Bridget, do you have a comment?
Yeah, can you clarify for me, since I'm still kind of a newbie, what we're voting to on motion to table means to have a second reading at next meeting? Or what does that mean?
Yeah, no, not usually. I mean, motion to table.
No.
Do we need a motion to table just because we want to have a second reading? I don't think so. Thank you, Rita.
No.
I didn't think we did it that way last time, but
Yeah.
You don't have a second, so you don't have to do it.
but I think that we
Mhm.
move to pass first reading
Yeah.
and then move
Yeah.
to the next meeting. That's what I think. Tabling to me, I think means really setting it on the side with not
Yeah.
much action.
Where does this first and second reading at the Environmental Commission come from? Don't think we've ever been doing that.
Yes, we have, Chris. Since I've been on, we've only done a couple, but
Well, okay. Sorry. So I assume the tabling motion failed because there's no second. So I move the motion. I move the resolution. There's a second for that. We can vote yes or no right now. Or if you want me to move, let's do a second reading next meeting. I'll do that instead.
I second that.
Okay. Aye.
Can we take a vote then, Brooks?
yeah, let's take a vote on that. To move it to second reading next meeting.
Aye.
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 I would like to see this resolution shorter, maybe one page somehow. It's just a bit too long for my taste.
I think we could take a look at that and see if there's some other ones that we could pull out, but okay, I think we're on to the next item on the agenda, which is reports from committees. And Aaron, can you bring Sarah Nedrich back as a panelist? And we can probably just change the screen back to, or stop sharing, whoever's sharing. So the first work group was biodiversity. We had a few different meetings last month. So I'm just going to kind of summarize the notes from all of them into one. There's a less turf grass initiative, which we are working with city staff to get a proposal in for a U of MCs to have a student project work on an idea of figuring out how we can start reducing turf grass across the city. I think that'll be going in tomorrow or this weekend. We also adjusted the dates of the our work group meetings in October and November to miss city holidays. We don't want to ask Sean Reynolds to come to meetings on city holidays. Seems poor form. We also discussed with Sean Reynolds the idea to educate homeowners on invasive species, and he offered to follow up with OSI to see if that would be something OSI would be willing to support. We talked about the sustainable landscaping workshop that is being planned with Mathi, just partially to make sure Sean was aware of what's going on there. We also had a brainstorming session about what if Ann Arbor is going to have a biodiversity plan and what topics should be included in that. And that's just more of it was a brainstorming exercise at this point. So there's still lots more to do before we decide if we're going to do something like that or not. And also we had a meeting, myself, Rita and Chris, on a proposed program called Go Beyond Beauty, which is spinning up as a Southeast Michigan type initiative to encourage nurseries to sell less invasive plants and also encourage landscaping companies to use less invasive plants. That'll still be a ways out before that gets anything happens with that, but we might bring it back in a next month or so just to bring everybody up to speed on what's going on and talk about what city staff would fit within that type of program. And that's it, unless I missed something. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
You're good, Brooks?
Circular economy. Steve, was there anything to report out?
You know, I've been out of it for the last 2 months, so I'm sorry I didn't really schedule a meeting. I don't know if the meeting was held in September, but we're up for the October meeting.
Yeah, we'll talk about yeah.
Yeah. So
okay. Water quality. I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything else you want to add.
Well, we put together a pretty bang up presentation. Other than that, we did have one other meeting where we went over our goals and started delegating a little bit. We also increased our membership. So we have, not just our 3 commission members now, we have rep from the Huron River Watershed Council and 3 U of M students that are focusing on water quality. So we're gaining strength to get our goals done. So it's pretty exciting. But yeah, that's all.
Okay, energy.
Yes, the September Energy Commission was devoted to A2 Strategy 3 Action 8, which is the Green Rental Housing Program. That's a program that is designed to encourage landlords to, well, actually essentially require landlords to upgrade the sustainability of their properties in order to get a certificate of occupancy permit renewal. That was first presented to the commission in March of 2022. In the plan, it was supposed to be passed in 2021 and go into effect in 2022. The review was good. A lot of progress has been made. There were a lot of both minor and major comments that were provided. I think all the minor ones will be included. Some major concerns were that there are thresholds with one of the pathways that are unlikely to result in significant decarbonization activities. So that's going to be reassessed. There was never an intent to vote on a resolution of support for the program, although it was presented. The idea is that the OSI is going to go back and look at the program and bring it back to the commission, hopefully in the next month or two, so that it can then be passed on to council and hopefully enacted. That was the sole topic of the meeting.
Okay, thanks, John. Planning. We don't really have a planning rep. Parks, Ann?
Hi, yeah, we met last week. We had a presentation, we had a couple presentations. One was from Ann Arbor Public Schools. They are rebuilding a couple of schools that are adjacent to parks, and so that's why they presented to us. It's kind of interesting. There was an article then today about Lawton Elementary, which was one of them, and a meeting that they did with their neighborhood. And yeah, so just might be interesting for some of you if you're into the impact, kind of the part, like sort of the way that parks needs to work with other organizations within the city. This is an interesting one because the schools rebuilding or putting up new buildings does have an impact on parks. And I think that was it for things that were of potential interest for this group.
Thanks. Council?
Wasn't even thinking about what have we done. I think there's going to be a revision to the home energy ordinance, the review thing. But I think that is paused to do a little bit more outreach to realtors. So that is, I suppose, of interest to us. I can't, I'm sorry, I should have thought systematically about this. In terms of planning, to which I am the liaison for council, although not to this body, so that is a different thing. The comprehensive plan, there's a draft of the comprehensive plan now going around, and I think that would be interesting for environmental commission members to look at. The slides are available on Legistar from the planning commission's meeting, it was this past Tuesday's meeting of the comprehensive plan subcommittee of the planning commission, if you can get through all those little layers of bureaucracy. And yeah, you may want to look at it. Mostly that presentation focused on the land use aspect of the comprehensive plan and not on some of the other things that are being updated as part of this update. But it may be interesting for people to look at the questions that the consultant is asking us now, because there are interesting questions to think about. Where there are heavily trafficked roads, for example, like Liberty Street, which run mostly through residential neighborhoods, but they are heavily trafficked. Are those places where we would think that additional density is appropriate? And if so, what kind of additional density? So, and we all had a brief discussion of invest a day of the issues that Sarah. Oh, you froze, so that means I must have frozen. So the kinds of investments that the city may need to make in infrastructure to manage and sewer water are going to be considerable if we actually want to bring a lot of money. So you all might be interested in thinking about some of that. But anyway, it's still a draft plan. And there we are.
Chris, did you have your hand up?
I did. Back to Ann. The schools do not have to follow city zoning and planning procedures, correct?
That question did not come up, so I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's true. University doesn't either. It's a separate governmental entity. But the school board's certainly subject to public opinion.
Right.
So I've seen some complaints about what's going on at Thurston as well. And,
yeah.
Have there been plans put on a table somewhere so we at least can see, in fact, what is being proposed?
We did not receive a copy of the presentation that they made. At least on the day of the meeting, we didn't have access to that in advance. So I can go back to Legistar and see if it was attached to the agenda after the fact. Other than that, you can obviously review the meeting to see what they presented. But yeah, I don't know what they've made available to the public and if they are obligated to make their plans public. They did say that the plans were provisional. They weren't showing us like detailed drawings. They were showing us sort of conceptual drawings. But they did say that I think they are planning to break ground in like 2025, 2026 timeframe. So I'm not sure how quickly they'll move through their design process.
Okay, thank you.
So next is a report from Chair. On the comprehensive plan, I was officially invited to be part of the Natural Features Focus Group. The meetings have not been scheduled yet, so there'll probably be 2 of them at some point I would assume in the near future, but I don't know when they're going to be scheduled. I was invited to go to the Washtenaw County Environmental Council meeting. They have in-person meetings once a year, and it was this week, and they had a little hour mixer beforehand. So I went to that just to chat with some of them. They had Phil Ruse there, who was the director of Eagle, give a presentation. It was a nice overview presentation of what Eagle does. I didn't necessarily get anything actionable from this group out of the presentation. He was asked their opinion on the Chevron decision, and they're basically waiting to see what the impact is. They don't know either. So I'd say Sarah nailed that answer. And I think that's it so next I think is a report from staff.
Sure. Yeah, I have attached a written report as well. Few updates from OSI. They won a big grant, almost 2.8 million, to help expand the EV charging across the community. And I think Missy will have more details on that in the next couple of weeks. There's a sustainable lawn care session upcoming on October 21st, kind of targeted at homeowners or lawn care service providers or property managers. There's information how to RSVP for that on there. And applications for the city's commercial EV charger program are now live, and there's a link taking folks to that. As far as public services, Public Works is having their open house on October 5th, and there's a link for that. It's going to be 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., very kind of family-friendly event. You can vote for a name for some snowplows, which is going to be pretty cool. The city of Ann Arbor, I think we've talked about it in this group, officially accepted the $1 million grant from American Forest to advance tree equity. So expand additional money to help with the tree canopy, updating the tree canopy assessment. And then let's see, there was a big update from Tiffany. So the city of Ann Arbor, in collaboration with Urban Ashes, has launched the city's first urban wood recycling program. I understand that that's been kind of 17 years in the works. So it's meant to ensure that logs coming out of the urban forest are put to their highest and best use. And I believe they're working on a press release for that, if it hasn't been released yet. And then the last update is the National Citizen Survey is complete, and you can go, there's a digital dashboard you can go play around with. But they have overall ratings, national benchmark and percentiles, and demographic breakdowns you can go kind of explore. That's it for me.
I had a quick question, if I may. Yes, thanks. For Anya. Anya, do you know if the University of Michigan has any kind of formal or informal arrangement with Urban Ashes? I met with the head of Urban Ashes about 2 years ago and gave him some contact information at U of M. I don't know if that led to anything or not. Are you aware of any cooperative work relationship?
I don't know that we've done anything with Urban Ashes specifically, although I can find out. But we actually are in the middle of a project that I think has been coordinated by our ground services team and Joe Trumpy, so is a faculty member, to actually get a mill on our campus, so that if we do have to take down a tree that has good wood still, which we try not to, obviously. But to be able to actually like mill that and process it on site and have that turned into furniture. So it's sort of like a collaboration between them and I think the art school, actually.
Interesting. It might be interesting just to involve Urban Ashes. Maybe there's a win-win-win
Yeah.
as opposed to just a win-win. So maybe that's something you can introduce. Thanks.
Yeah, good idea.
Rita, you have a question?
Just another comment on the urban ashes kind of thing. I saw something recently that used turned wood from down to trees that I thought was interesting, because I think most of the things I've seen from urban ashes is straight lumber, straight sawn lumber. And this was an effort to kind of take it into a different and artistic direction. And just a thought to pass along to all who are working in that area, that it could be bigger. And there could be more things that are kept out of the carbon emission stream. That
Any other comments? So I think next, are there any future agenda items people would like to request? Well, if you come up with some items, just let us know whenever. Our next meeting is on October 24th. And now we're on to our second public comment time. This is opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 888-788-0099. Enter meeting ID 962-0336-6543. To raise your hand, press 9. To unmute, press *6. City staff will select callers who have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. There may be a delay up to 30 seconds before connection is established. Aaron, do we have any callers?
We do not.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? And there's a second. We have a second. Okay, I guess we're all done. See you next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.